Bayley Hazen Blue, the last cheese that we're going to taste today, is another raw milk cheese. And this is one of the first cheeses that was made at Jasper Hill back in 2003. It's kind of our flagship. And we have since not only graduated our soft cheeses to that tip-up system I talked about from that kind of like round starter vat, but also we have invested in a blue cheese vat, which is sort of this long half pipe. It's a beautiful to watch this curd form. So you set the curd with, first you acidify, right, with the starter cultures. You start turning that sugar into acid. That's kind of loosening up the little protein bundles. And then you add your rennet, which is a coagulant, and it does its magic and helps your proteins kind of stick to each other. And then you've got basically a big vat of jello-like, it's like yogurt, a big yogurty vat just kind of sitting there. You let it set until the perfect moment when it has the right amount of body and firmness. And then you go through with these knives. It's like, actually it's more like a harp or a set of wires. And all at once you do this sideways swipe. And then you've got all of these kind of half moon wiggly bits of yogurt. And then you cut it the other direction. And then you end up with these like long, actually first you do the long ribbons. So you send a harp from one end of the half pipe to the other, and then you have like a vat full of spaghetti, and then you go in and you cut it sideways, and then you end up with these perfect little jet puff marshmallow shaped curds. And the difference in consistency and the perfection of each individual curd is so much improved from when we were trying to make it in a round vat, where you can never really make a round shape into perfect little squares. There's always like kind of the cornery bits. And for blue cheese in particular, it's very important to have consistent curd size and texture, because you're trying to pile up those curds into a cylindrical form, perforated so it can kind of drain. You can see this conveyor belt. There's even a timing setting on that, so it can drain on the belt and get to the top when it's at the perfect texture, and it kind of spills over into the forms. And then you want it to stand up straight after you take it out of the forms, but you also don't want it to be too dense and collapse. You want it to have an airy, open texture, like the crumb of a bread. And with blue cheese in particular, it's the trickiest cheese to make because you're making a mold ripened cheese, like a surface ripened cheese, like a bloomy rind. Same cousin to the fluffy white mold, it's just fluffy blue mold, but you're making it inside out. You're like making an inside out soft ripened cheese. And you can't do that if there isn't room for that blue to grow, and if there isn't oxygen for that blue to breathe. So you have to make this form that's going to keep its shape and keep its open pockets. And then you spike it with a stainless steel spike. And the blue mold spores that we add to the milk phase, who've just been chilling dormant until they get into the caves, all of a sudden get a breath of fresh air when you spike it. They start to grow and develop and ripen the cheese. So every once in a while, it's only happened once that I can remember in my 12 years at Jasper Hill, where we've missed a wheel and we forgot to poke it. And at the end, you cut it open and it's totally white. No blue at all has formed. And it's like chalky and acidic and boring, doesn't really taste like anything. It's just kind of salty. Like it's more like feta than like a fudgy, bold, slightly spicy blue cheese like it should be. And so that really transforms the textures, makes it like a fudgy, silky texture. And it, like I said, just gives it that interesting depth of flavor. So our Ayrshire cows, our brown and white spotted cows, we think they're the perfect cows for blue cheese because they have naturally petite fat globules. So the little blobs of fat in the milk are especially small. They stay evenly dispersed, and blue mold is really fat hungry. It likes to eat the fats, break them down, and turn them into those anise spice black licoricey aromas. And so Bayley Hazen Blue is known as being very flavorful, but also very balanced. And we think those small fat globules that stay evenly dispersed and are small and spread out lead to a less like spicy and assertive blue. And it's more just like it's cheesy and toasty and buttery first. And then it's a more subtle anise spice note. It's not as aggressive as like a Roquefort, which is made from sheep's milk, which is super fatty. And there's a lot of fuel for that blue mold to eat. And it has Roquefort has a more dense bluing because the openness is like a little bit more frequent than Bayley. So Bayley, a good batch of Bayley, you can tell because it has nice big areas of whiteness, and then, you know, a little bit less blue interspersed, and that just helps create a more balanced experience. Blue cheese tends to, as I mentioned, it's like a little bit spicy. It's usually salty, and undersalted blue cheese just isn't right. It doesn't go good. So there's usually other problems associated with like an undersalted blue. So the blue style tends to be a little saltier, a little spicier. And with all soft ripened cheeses, including blue, you tend to get a mild bitterness, and you wouldn't really pick up on the bitterness if you're enjoying it alone. Some blues are noticeably bitter, like in a pleasant way, like endive or, you know, green vegetables. But you notice it when you try to pair it with a bitter beverage, or you know, I would avoid like a marmalade with that pithy bitterness, because when you put bitter on bitter, it's not pleasant. It kind of becomes overwhelming, where any one of the two things is in balance. When you put them together, it knocks itself out of balance. So I would suggest something off dry. That's why blue cheeses are often paired with like port and sauterne and ice ciders or ice wines, dessert wines. Blue cheese and dessert wines is just like the most indulgent and beautiful way to end a meal. It's like the sweet and the salty and the bitter, and a good dessert wine also has a nice acidity too. It kind of rounds out that whole experience. So that's a nice way to go. Also, like porters and stouts, especially if they have a little bit of that caramelization, caramely taste, can be a lovely match with blue. But also blue is the most surprising cheese when we do pairings. We often will design a pairing on paper based on our experience, based on what we know are going to match well, based on the sensory attributes that we've detected in either the style of beverage or the cheese that we know well. And then blue's always the wild card, where we're like, oh, that's not going to work. And just for fun, we try it and we're like, whoa, weird. This blue actually went really well with that Chardonnay. I thought it would be way too assertive, but somehow it held its own. So it's really fun cheese to experiment and try different styles and pairings. And often if you find one that's not great, blue can like clash as well as it can harmonize. It's instructive. It teaches you something about pairing. It's about like what could go wrong. So I love to always include blue cheese in a pairing class for that reason. So Michael's put together an awesome series of content for this month. If this is the first one that you've tuned in for, I highly encourage you to check out the other ones that he's put together. I'm going to do two more, one pairing chocolate and wine, and the other bourbon and some charcuterie. So we've got a lot of fun stuff coming down the pike. And you're also able to order a tasting set from Jasper Hill. That's going to be the same cheeses that we're going to use in different settings. So this was the story of Jasper Hill and the artisan cheese movement. And then in the pairing classes, we're really going to dive deep into the sensory properties of each cheese and pair them with other things. So you can pick up that tasting kit at jasperhillfarm.com/shop. And then there's a link to that specific tasting kit for these classes. So I'm so happy to be able to be here today to share the story of Jasper Hill and my love of cheese, obviously. And thanks for supporting American Cheese Month and American cheese producers all over the country. I hope you have a lot of fun tasting and learning more about it. Thank you so much, Michael, for having me.